3 days before Christmas, the town looked like something printed on the front of a holiday card. Fresh snow covered every rooftop, colorful lights shimmered from front porches, and children laughed as they pulled sleds through the neighborhood. Everyone seemed to be preparing for family dinners, warm fireplaces, and wrapped presents. For me, Christmas had always meant something different. It meant working extra shifts at the warehouse so I could afford gifts for people who rarely thanked me. It meant paying another overdue utility bill for my parents instead of buying something for myself. It meant pretending everything was fine whenever relatives asked why I still lived at home at 27. My parents always had the same answer: Ethan is just getting himself together. What they never told anyone was that I had postponed college to help pay off my father's gambling debts after he lost his construction job. They never mentioned that I covered my mother's medical insurance for nearly 3 years, or that I bought groceries almost every week. Instead, they praised my younger sister, Melissa. Melissa was the golden child. She could do no wrong. When she quit another job after only 2 weeks, my parents called her independent. When I worked 60-hour weeks, they called me lucky to have employment. I convinced myself things would eventually change. I was wrong. That evening, after finishing a 12-hour shift, I stopped at a bakery to pick up the chocolate cake my mother loved every Christmas. I also bought my father's favorite coffee beans and a silver bracelet for Melissa that had cost nearly an entire day's wages. Even after everything, I still wanted them to have a wonderful Christmas. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt strange. The porch light was off. The curtains were closed. Then I noticed 3 large black garbage bags sitting neatly beside the front door. My stomach tightened. I walked closer. Written across one of the bags in thick black marker was my name. Ethan. Confused, I dropped the cake onto the porch without even noticing. The plastic bags were filled with my clothes, books, framed photographs, work boots, and the old baseball glove my grandfather had given me before he passed away. My entire life had been packed into trash bags. No. I rushed to the front door and grabbed the handle. Locked. I tried again. Nothing. I pulled out my key. It didn't fit. The locks had been changed. My heart started pounding. I knocked harder. Dad. Silence. Mom, I know you're home. Still nothing. Then my phone vibrated. It was a text message from my mother. We've decided it's best if you find somewhere else to live. Melissa needs your room. You're old enough to take care of yourself. Please don't make a scene. We left your things outside. Merry Christmas. I stared at the screen, reading the message again and again, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I looked toward the living room window. The curtain moved. For just a second, I saw my father's face. He was watching me. Our eyes met. Instead of opening the door, he slowly let the curtain fall back into place. That hurt more than the text. I knocked one last time. Please, just talk to me. Nothing. Snowflakes landed on my jacket as the cold wind grew stronger. My fingers were numb, but I barely noticed. The only thing I could feel was the crushing weight in my chest. Everything I had sacrificed, every paycheck, every missed opportunity, every promise I had kept, it had all ended with garbage bags on a frozen porch. As I sank onto the top step, trying to hold back tears, I heard the creak of a gate across the street. An elderly man in a long wool coat stood watching quietly from his front yard. He looked at the trash bags, then at me. After a long moment, he picked up a lantern from his porch, walked slowly through the snow, and stopped a few feet away. In a calm, gentle voice, he asked one simple question. "Son, have you had dinner yet?" For a moment, I couldn't answer. The old man's question was so ordinary, yet after everything that had happened, it nearly broke me. My parents had just thrown me out like unwanted furniture, and the first person to ask if I was okay wasn't family. It was a stranger. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a weak smile. "No, sir." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Then standing out here in the cold won't solve anything. Come inside. My name is Walter Hayes." I hesitated. My parents had always warned me not to trust strangers, yet they were the very people who had abandoned me. Walter noticed my uncertainty. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "If all you want is a warm meal and a place to think for an hour, that's enough." His voice carried no pressure, only kindness. I looked back at the dark house where I'd spent most of my life. Not a single curtain moved now. Whoever was inside had already decided I no longer existed. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my bags. "I'd appreciate that," Walter smiled. "Good. Let's get you out of this weather." The moment we stepped inside his house, warmth wrapped around me like a blanket. The living room glowed with Christmas lights. A decorated tree stood beside the fireplace, covered in handmade ornaments instead of expensive decorations. Cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air. It didn't look luxurious, it looked like home. Walter handed me a towel. "Dry off before you catch a cold." A few minutes later, we sat at his dining table eating home, made chicken soup and fresh rolls. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the first spoonful. "You cook?" I asked. He chuckled. "When you live alone long enough, you either learn or starve." I laughed for the first time in weeks. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar. Walter didn't rush to ask questions. He simply let the silence settle until I was ready. Finally, he spoke. "So, what happened?" The words poured out before I could stop them. I told him everything. How I skipped college to help pay my father's debts. How I worked overtime every holiday. How I paid electric bills, bought groceries, repaired the leaking roof, and even covered Melissa's car insurance after she crashed her first car. And tonight, Walter asked quietly, "They said my sister deserves my room because she's starting an online business." "What kind of business? I don't know," I admitted. "She changes ideas every month." Walter raised an eyebrow. "And they threw you out for that?" I nodded. "They've always believed Melissa would become successful someday. They said I was. Reliable. Reliable people don't need help." Walter stared into his coffee cup for several seconds. Then he sighed. "I knew someone like you once. My son." I looked up. He believed family always came first. Walter continued. "He gave and gave until there was nothing left for himself. What happened?" A sad smile crossed his face. "He passed away 15 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry. So am I." The room grew quiet again. "I see something of him in you." Walter finally said, "Not because you're alike, but because neither of you knew when to stop sacrificing yourselves." His words stayed with me. For years, I had believed enduring mistreatment made me a good son. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I woke in the guest room to the smell of pancakes. Walter was already making breakfast. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I made a few phone calls." My heart sank. "You called my parents?" He shook his head. "No. I called someone who owes me a favor." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a business card, Hayes Community Foundation. Beneath it was a handwritten note, "Temporary Operations Assistant. Starting immediately. Housing included." I stared at him in disbelief. "You don't even know me." Walter smiled gently. "I know enough. I watched you for almost 2 years from across the street. You left for work before sunrise. You carried groceries into your parents' house. You shoveled their driveway every winter. You never complained." Then his expression turned serious. "But I also watched them take you for granted." Tears filled my eyes. No one had ever noticed. No one except the man who had never spoken to me before that night. Walter stood and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes," he said, "the family you're born into teaches you what pain feels like. He smiled warmly. "And the family you find later teaches you what love is." For the first time since standing on that frozen porch, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. Exactly 1 year after the night my parents left my life in garbage bags on the front porch, I stood beneath the towering Christmas tree in the lobby of the Hayes Community Foundation. The building buzzed with volunteers carrying wrapped presents, winter coats, and boxes of food for families struggling through the holidays. Children's laughter echoed through the hallways as they waited for Santa to arrive. I paused for a moment, taking it all in. Last Christmas, I had been homeless. This Christmas, I was helping thousands of people feel at home. Life had changed in ways I never imagined. Walter had done far more than offer me a temporary job. He had become the mentor I never knew I needed. He taught me how to manage people with kindness instead of fear. He taught me that leadership meant listening before speaking. Most importantly, he taught me that my worth had never depended on whether my parents appreciated me. Over the past year, I had earned a promotion from operations assistant to executive director of the foundation. Together, Walter and I expanded our holiday program, providing meals, rent assistance, and gifts to hundreds of families who otherwise would have faced Christmas with empty tables. Every smiling child reminded me why I kept going. Pain had brought me here. Purpose made me stay. That afternoon, Walter entered my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I heard we've officially reached 1,000 families," he said proudly. I smiled. "Actually, 1,037. He laughed. "I knew promoting you was the best decision I ever made." "You took a chance on me." "No," Walter replied. "You proved I was right." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in over a year. "Mom," my smile disappeared. Walter noticed immediately. "You don't have to answer." I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared, then another call, this time from Dad. I let it ring. 5 minutes later, Melissa texted, "Can we please talk? It's important." For 12 months, none of them had contacted me. Not on my birthday, not when I received my promotion, not even at Thanksgiving. Now, just days before Christmas, they suddenly remembered I existed. Something had happened. That evening, curiosity finally got the better of me. I listened to my mother's voicemail. Her voice sounded completely different from the cold woman who had texted me. "We left your things outside. Merry Christmas." She was crying. "Ethan, please call us. We've made mistakes. We need to talk. Please." I closed my eyes. The words stirred old memories, but not enough to erase the truth. The next morning, I searched public property records and local news. It didn't take long to understand. My parents' house was in foreclosure. My father had invested nearly all of their savings into one of Melissa's guaranteed business opportunities. She had convinced them to refinance the house to fund her dream. The business failed within months. Melissa accumulated credit card debt, stopped making payments, and eventually moved to another city with her boyfriend, leaving my parents to deal with the financial disaster. The same parents who had insisted she was worth investing in had lost almost everything because of that investment. The irony wasn't lost on me. A week later, I received another message, this time from my father. "We were wrong. We should never have treated you that way. Can we meet on Christmas Eve, please?" I read the message several times. A year ago, I would have rushed to help them. I would have emptied my savings without hesitation. Not anymore. Walter quietly stepped into my office. They finally called. I nodded. "They're losing everything." He looked at me carefully. "What are you feeling?" I thought for a long moment. "I'm sad, angry, a little. Do you hate them?" I surprised myself by shaking my head. "No, I just don't trust them anymore." Walter smiled gently. "That's an important difference." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting." and compassion doesn't require returning to the place that broke you. His words settled deep inside me. That evening, I replied with a single text. I'll meet you on Christmas Eve, but this conversation will be different than the ones we used to have. Within seconds, my mother answered, "Thank you. We knew you'd help us." I looked at the message for several seconds before locking my phone. They still didn't understand. They believed I was coming back to rescue them. They believed I was still the son who would sacrifice everything just to earn a little love. They had no idea that the young man they threw out into the snow had disappeared a year ago. The man walking into that Christmas Eve meeting had learned the greatest lesson of his life. Love should never require you to lose your self-respect. And for the first time ever, I was ready to prove it. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow covering the streets, just as it had 1 year earlier. As I parked outside the small cafe my parents had chosen for our meeting, I couldn't help remembering the freezing night they had left my belongings on the porch. For a long time, I thought that moment had destroyed my life. Now I realized it had redirected it. When I walked inside, my parents were already waiting. My mother looked older than I remembered. The confident smile she used to wear had disappeared, replaced by anxious eyes and trembling hands. My father stared into his coffee, unable to meet my gaze. For several seconds, no one spoke. Finally, my mother stood. "Ethan," she reached out as if to hug me. I took a small step back. "I'm glad you're both healthy," I said politely. "But I'd rather we sit down." Her smile faded. We sat in silence until my father finally cleared his throat. "We made terrible mistakes." I nodded. "You did. We were unfair to you, yes. We thought Melissa needed us more." I looked at both of them. "You didn't just choose Melissa. You chose to throw your son out of his home 3 days before Christmas." Neither of them argued. Because they couldn't, my mother wiped away tears. "We regret it every day." I believed she regretted the consequences. Whether she truly regretted the decision, I wasn't sure. My father took a deep breath. "The bank is taking the house. We've lost almost everything. I lost my retirement. Your mother has been working part-time." He paused before saying the words they had clearly rehearsed. "We were hoping that you could help us." There it was, the real reason for the meeting, not reconciliation. Rescue? I folded my hands on the table. "A year ago, I would have emptied every dollar in my account for you." "I know," my mother whispered. "But that son no longer exists." Tears rolled down her face. "We're your parents," I answered quietly. "And I was your son." The table fell silent. "You packed my life into garbage bags. You changed the locks. You watched me stand in the snow. You never opened the door." My father's shoulders slumped. "I know, no." I replied gently, "You remember. But you don't know what that felt like." For the first time, neither of them had an excuse. After a long silence, I reached into my coat pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. My parents looked at it hopefully. Inside wasn't a check. It was a document. My father opened it slowly. "What is this?" A letter from my attorney. Their faces immediately filled with confusion. "It explains that an anonymous donor has paid enough to stop the foreclosure." My mother's eyes widened. You saved our house. I kept you from becoming homeless, but I didn't give you money. I paid the bank directly. There are conditions." My father kept reading. "No refinancing, no gambling loans, no transferring ownership, no financial support for Melissa without professional advice." He looked up. "You thought of everything." I had to. "You taught me what happens when people confuse love with endless sacrifice." Tears streamed down my mother's face. "We don't deserve this." I nodded. "You're right. You don't. But I wasn't helping because you earned it. I was helping because I refused to become the kind of person who leaves family in the cold." That sentence broke whatever pride they still had. Both of them quietly cried, not because they had won, because they finally understood what they had lost. Later that evening, I returned to Walter's house. The dining room was filled with laughter. Foundation volunteers, neighbors, and several families we had helped during the year gathered around the table. Children decorated cookies, while Christmas music played softly in the background. Walter stood as I entered. "Everything go all right," I smiled. "It ended exactly the way it needed to." He nodded, already understanding. Then he handed me a neatly wrapped gift. Inside was a leather folder. Confused, I opened it. At the top was a legal document. Hayes Community Foundation Successor Appointment Agreement. I looked at Walter in disbelief. "You've built something incredible," he said. "But someday someone else must carry it forward." He smiled proudly. "I've chosen you." Emotion caught in my throat. "Walter, you gave me a second chance," I whispered. He shook his head. "No, we gave each other one." Without thinking, I embraced him. For the first time since losing my grandfather years ago, I knew what it felt like to hug a father. Not by blood, by choice. That night, as snow gently fell outside, I stood by the window holding a mug of hot chocolate. Across town, my parents still had a house to celebrate Christmas in, because of me, but this time I wasn't sitting alone hoping they would notice my sacrifices. I was surrounded by people who loved me without asking me to earn it. I finally understood something that had taken me 28 years to learn. The sweetest revenge isn't humiliation. It isn't anger. It isn't making those who hurt you suffer. The sweetest revenge is building a life so full of peace, purpose, and genuine love that the people who once discarded you can only look back and realize what they threw away. And as the lights on Walter's Christmas tree sparkled beside the fireplace, I smiled not because I had won against my parents, but because I had finally won back myself. The end.